This is ESPN Esports. He's Jacob Wolf. I'm Arda Ocal, breaking down the news regarding Cloud9. The LCS has fined the organization $175,000 for issuing restricted stock units to their players. C9 will also be required to buy out those stocks, which will be estimated to be anywhere between $330,000 to $600,000. Jacob, what do we know about this right now?
So during the summer of this year, there was essentially an audit for all 10 teams in the LCS. There were rumors that some of the LCS teams, including Cloud9, were making amendments or contract extensions without league approval. And so the process of contracting a player within the Riot system is that you have to contract the player or get near a contract. And then when you contract them, you have to submit what's called a summary sheet that summarizes the points of your deal, the major points of your deal with the player. And in some cases, you also have to submit a contract itself to Riot Games, and then Riot has to approve that before you're allowed to use that player on your active roster in the LCS. And anytime that there is supposed to be a contract amendment or a contract extension in the middle of a deal, that is also supposed to go to Riot. So during the summer, there were several teams, multiple teams in the league, who complained because they heard that there were teams within the league who were making contract amendments or extensions without the approval of Riot, and therefore those extensions or amendments were not being added to the global contract database, which is public. This is important because that means that player or teams could go trade for players. They want to understand how long the contracts they're buying out or trading for could last. And so there were several teams that hearing that these amendments and extensions were being made without Riot approval. So when those complaints got to Riot in June, Riot at the end of June decided to launch a audit into all teams' contracts, all 10 of them, and they asked all teams to submit their most up-to-date contracts for each player or face potential punishments. Cloud9 cooperated with that. All the teams cooperated with that and submitted submitted the most up-to-date contracts to Riot Games, and essentially a league operations person archive these into the Riot system. And the Cloud9 ones included references to restricted stock units. Mm-hmm. That data point was sort of overlooked, supposedly at Riot. The person that archived these documents overlooked the restricted stock unit point, which it was against the rules as they were outlined. There was a rule that was made in November 2017, the beginning of franchising for the LCS, that said no active player could own stock.
And it's important to note, before November 2017, this was allowed. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, and it was, the league was much less restricted before franchising, so there were different rules. But in November 2017, there was a hard stop for that. So, it was overlooked, this rule breaking change, and in August there was a discussion that happened where the league operations person who saw the restricted stock unit clauses in those contracts mentioned it at the Riot offices, and then there was an investigation that was opened at the end of August that proceeded throughout the past couple of months, including during Cloud9's time at Worlds. It was completed after Cloud9 was done with Worlds and was released yesterday.
So let's talk about the process of this actually happening, just putting aside the legality of it for a second. These players are engaging in these conversations with C9. And as you told me offline, only 2 of these 7 players had representation as this was going on. Why is that a concern?
We're at a point where League of Legends is coming up on a 10-year anniversary of esports in the next year. And, for me, I think now that there's been I've met player agents who are fairly reputable in the space and lawyers for about the past 4 years in professional League of Legends. I think it's really important that all players have representation, or anyone who in a talent-based industry has some form of representation, whether that be attorney or agent. Only 2 of the 7 players that were issued stock in this case are restricted stock units. The 7 players being Blabber, Spenskarin, Licorice, Sneaky, Zazel, Smoothie, and Jensen. Sorry, that's a lot to get through. All of them should have had representation when negotiating contracts with Cloud9, but a lot of these players think that the organizations are acting in their best interests, and therefore they don't see the value in paying someone a commission to help them, or paying them a fee in the case of a lawyer. I think that at this point, there's no excuse for that, really. I think that players should have representation in League of Legends. There have been representation around the scene long enough, and all you have to do is talk to some of your teammates to figure out who those people are. I think that is super important when these players are negotiating, and I think that a lot of the players in the LCS and across the world in League of Legends don't necessarily take that very seriously. That all they really take seriously is playing the game, and they don't really care about the rest outside of their career, whether that be banking and investments and sort of building their future, or whether that be representation. And I think that it's really important that they do take it seriously, and it's kind of a shame that they have not.
Do you think C9 was acting nefariously throughout this process?
I don't think so. I think that the sort of the vibe that I got in my reporting yesterday was that Cloud9 cooperated fully with Riot, that Cloud9 was acting like most startups do. You know, restricted stock units aren't particularly unique in this instance. It's very, very common in startups that restricted stock units are issued, or that you can become vested in a startup and have some sort of way to be paid out, particularly if a company is eventually acquired by a major company and there's a buyout. So I think that this was just pretty standard in the startup tech world, but obviously it's a violation of the rules. But I don't think that there was malintent here. Mm-hmm. You know, there were some players who negotiated lower salaries based off stock unit value. So essentially they were issued stock as a part of negotiation, and that, you know, Cloud9 was recently reported by Forbes to be a $400 million company. So obviously that there's some value in having stock there. And yeah, I don't think that there was any malintent. I think Cloud9 will pay the $175,000 in fines to Riot, and then will also pay out or renegotiate salaries, which is how they're going to correct the stock. They either have to pay them out immediately as a flat sum, or they have to renegotiate with players who have it in their contracts. They have to renegotiate new contracts with a higher salary. That's the option that Riot has given them. I think that will be taken care of, no problem. I think if it was nefarious, we would have seen some sort of ban levied against, or suspension or something levied against, you know, Jack Etienne and his management team. That did not happen. It's fairly a monetary fine, and I think that is because that there was no malintent found here. So
the punishment does fit the crime in this case?
I believe so, yeah. I mean, this is going to be one of the highest fines or payouts having to be made in a disciplinary action for Riot. But I do think that generally, I think that this kind of fits the bill. You know, they're fining them $25,000 per player violation, and there's 7 of them. So that's how you get to the number of 175, and then, you know, obviously the 330 to 605 is based off of how much those stocks may be worth.
Some people watching this right now, Jacob, might be thinking of Bjergsen and him owning equity in TSM as part of that new deal. Why is that different?
So the rule that allows Bjergsen to have equity, that rule was made in October of 2019, 1 month ago. That was something that during the summer, and Riot said this in their ruling, but during this summer, there was a discussion around the league of how you could potentially reward and incentivize keeping your franchise players, particularly the people who have been with you for a very, very long time. Mm-hmm. And so Riot came to a rule in discussion with its teams where players with more than 3 consecutive years of service on a team would be eligible for equity. There are only 3 players in the league right now in the LCS who have that have not changed teams for 3 years in a row. And that is Bjergsen, who obviously got that, Sneaky, and Stixay from Counterlogic Gaming. And obviously, I got a lot of questions as to why Sneaky was a part of this fine. Well, these restricted stock units that Sneaky owns in Cloud9 were actually negotiated before that rule changed last month. So Riot said that all these restricted stock units were issued in the past 16 months. And, you know, 16 months ago, there was still a rule that existed that said no players were allowed to own any portion of equity. I also just want to be really clear, a restricted stock unit is not the same as actual stock. What Bjergsen has is very, very concrete in whatever he was issued. It wasn't like he could earn his way to stock. He was granted actual stock. The restricted stock units essentially would eventually become real stock units, in the case that Cloud9 was ever acquired, would be paid out in full. But it's essentially like company vesting if you're in a big company. And so it's not like, you know, RSUs are not exactly the same as real equity, but it certainly, according to Riot, was a violation of rules.
So Riot has also mentioned that the $175,000 fine will be donated to charity. Jacob's full reporting is available at espn.com/esports.